I've spent the past 3 years working on a webtoon, and I'm gonna show you how to get from something like this to something like this in 9 steps. Disclaimer, I'm self-taught and in no way a professional webtoon creator. I'm just a software engineer that probably should shower more than I actually do. On that note, let's get to it. First, create a file. Select a webtoon preset. I like the one with a 1600 width because I like working with bigger sizes. And you can always downscale, but it's harder to upscale. Clicking create will create a CMC type file. When you open this kind of file, you'll be led to the page manager, which is an overview of all the pages in your webtoon. Here you can right-click to add or remove pages. You can also do more detailed actions in the Page Manager tab, which other videos go more into detail about. I'll link them here. One thing you'll notice, if you have a canvas at a larger width, like my webtoon is, you'll hit the height limit pretty quickly, especially if you're trying to emulate the length of a webtoon original. Clip Studio Paint sets a height limit of 50K, so what I do is have 2 pages per episode, and have the break between both pages be along the lines of a panel so it goes unnoticed. This is the spacing on the left and right of panels that you might have seen in some webtoons. I create this in a really hacky way. I just create a rectangle, then move it to the left and right of the file, and have the ruler so that it aligns with the rectangle. Grid. I like setting the grid to center with a gap and subdivision that will give me something like so. The grid is pretty useful for when I want to approximately center elements, or have them not too close to the edges of the canvas. Screen guide. The on-screen guide allows us to see what portion of our webtoon will be visible on screen. Mine is set to the aspect ratio of them taller iPhones. Feel free to copy. Lastly, let's map both the grid and on-screen guide to shortcut keys, so we can toggle them like wham. Now let me quickly create a rough draft for this demo. My idea here, I'm thinking sexy vampire boyfriend meets submissive werewolf boyfriend, and they fall in love because of the vampire's hand size. Well, actually, maybe we should make it a Yuri. I can't remember the last time I drew a man. Gojo doesn't count. How do we create the panels and the bubbles? For me, I'm a loser, so I just use other people's assets. Bubbles. In my opinion, this bubble asset is the GOAT. And it's the one I use for most of my dialogue in my own webtoon. This one I've used only in a couple of episodes, but it's great for setting that mood. These are some other ones that I've used, so if you want to download these, please be my guest. Once you've downloaded them, you can go to your balloon tool or frame tool and click add subtool, and they should show up. Add them, and then you should be able to use them to jazz up your toon. I prefer freehand balloon tools because it can be easier to achieve like a nice organic shape. So I'm gonna set up the bubbles quickly and then do the panels. We'll want to add tails to our balloons, right? Well, it's as easy as going to the balloon tail tool. And you know that thing in manga where they have the tail pointing inwards to show that someone off screen is speaking? Well, we can do that here too. Cough, cough, unlike Photoshop. So what do you do when your balloons look sloppy AF? What I do is use the simplify vector tool and then manually move the points around. Don't try moving the points around before simplifying, because then you'll end up with something like this, and there's no way you'll want to be dragging around these. We have our bubbles now. Let's set up them panels. In the create frame tool, there's some default tools. I use the 4th tool, which is this asset. When creating panels, I'll enable snap to special ruler so that my panels snap to the gutter if I want them to. So adding text to bubbles is fairly simple. Click on the bubble that you want to add text to, then use the text tool to write on it. The text and bubble will be tied together on the same layer while still being separate objects. The font that I'm using is one that I've created with Calligrapher. There's lots of tutorials on it that I'll link somewhere. If you want multiple fonts in your webtoon, create a font list that contains only those fonts used in it. To do this, click Settings, then Create Font List, then go to every font that you want to include and check it. Now that we've got the rough down, we can start creating the intro and call to action. The call to action is like, subscribe to my Patreon, check out my socials, you know. So now that we've got that, let's convert them to file objects. This means that if we pasted these to other episodes to reuse them, then if we made changes to them like adding detail or just changing it up completely, those changes will propagate to its references. All of them. Note that if you want to make a change to a file object, then unopened files referencing it will not register that change. To force them to register the change, either have the file open or right-click, update file object, or update all file objects if your file has multiple. So art-wise, I'm not really sure what to say that I haven't already said, although my style has changed since I last made an art tutorial.
Just do it!
So I like doing the most reviled part of webtooning in two ways: 3D, or using a Creative Commons photo and filtering it to hell and back. I know, I'm so honorable, please clap. So for 3D, after positioning your object in place, convert it to lines and tones. I like using depth to get less line weight on lines that are farther back, and more weight to the lines that are closer to the viewer. I don't like smooth because it can result in the outline diverging from the boundaries of the fill sometimes, which looks weird. Then I add a gradient map so we can get a vibe check. Then I paint over the tones masks so we can get something less cel-shaded and more painterly, since that's the style I prefer. Then I clip the 3D object over everything and set it to color or overlay or something blending mode to easily get some color differentiation. Then I'll add lighting. Then, I know, a lot of steps. Lastly, I'll merge everything, copy, then undo that merge, paste that merge, then filter it with retro film and Gaussian blur. Mask it and erase some of it to create a hazy effect. For photos, I do the exact same thing, convert it to lines and tones, but the pop-up will be slightly different. I usually have black fill unchecked, but if you check it, then that means very dark areas like this will be included in the outline layer. So there we have it. The She-Wolf to She-EO pipeline. The Omega of your Omegaverse dreams, now in webtoon style. Now, normally I wouldn't use 3D or other people's photos, but webtoons are a pain in the ass. Like, I don't know any webtoon artist that hasn't encountered wrist or arm problems. It's really a phenomenon that should be studied. At the end, I color dialogue bubbles of main characters according to who's speaking. I don't bother coloring the bubbles of tertiary characters because just like figuring out the meaning of life, it doesn't really matter. I do this because I can't be arsed to draw a panel every time a character speaks, but I still want the reader to know who's speaking. Pictures. Self-explanatory. Decorations. Clip Studio has a decorations tool that I don't use in my standalone art, but I use a lot in my webtoon to achieve an easy glow up. Here are the decorations I use. Like your weed dealer, I've got all the strains. Bouquet, sparkles, flowers, grunge, patterns, you name it. AKA, how to get your webtoon looking like a webtoon original. Just in case that term is unfamiliar, a webtoon original is a comic on webtoons.com that the site actively promotes and pays the artists to make. All webtoons start off unpaid and on Webtoon Canvas until they get an offer from a webtoon editor to become an original. To increase your chances to be an original, there's many things you can do, like being in a less popular genre or having certain tropes, but I'm just going to go over the visual part, making your Canvas webtoon look like an original. Panels versus full screen cinematics. In this comment, the artist of I'm the Grim Reaper talks about balancing cinematics with Korean style paneling. You don't want to overwhelm the reader with too many cinematics, but a cinematic can really make a moment look badass, so I have a cinematic per story beat, but Korean style paneling for exposition or banter. Tangent. Elements should be distanced from pressure points, so readers' eyes can follow them more naturally. The edges of a canvas and the edges of a frame are considered pressure points, as well as other objects. Centering stuff is a pretty safe way to avoid tangents, so I usually have my content centered. Spacing. For panels and text, you want to minimize having multiple within the same horizontal area, and instead space them vertically so the readers can know what to read next. More simple scenes should have less spacing, whereas major story beats or scene changes should have more spacing in between. Camera angles! You'll notice that I have a mix of close and wide shots. The wide shots are used to establish positions of characters as the story progresses, while the close shots are for much more emotive moments. For every scene, you'll want to have this mix to establish time and space, while also showing how hot the characters are. So I'm only going to go over how to upload to webtoons.com because the process for uploading to another webcomic site like Tapas is fairly similar. Go to the site, click Create Series, enter your title and genres, a short blurb, and then create thumbnails. Then click Add Episode. Go back to Clip Studio and hit Special Export and enter the width and height requirements before exporting. For every comic hosting site, they dictate the requirements somewhere, so don't worry about what they are. The website will tell you. Then hit Export and voila! For episode, you'll need to create a thumbnail, so I'll just use a panel from the exported episode and downsize it. Alrighty, let's upload that thing! There's also this Upload from Clip Studio Paint button, but I'm not really sure what it does and I'm too scared to try it. Before publishing, I like double checking it with preview options to catch any weird formatting issues or see if I want to make a section longer or shorter. Lastly, note that this is the outcome of a day's work, and that's why it looks like a Wattpad shitpost. A typical episode takes me 3 weeks, with a day or 2 dedicated to outlining and laying out a rough draft, a few days on writing, and the rest of that time on art. If you want to start your own webtoon while touching grass regularly, you might want to sacrifice on length or detail. So yeah, hope that was helpful, and if it wasn't, then maybe rewatch it.